Donald Trump Jr. got some exciting news the other day as he was interviewing a top Venezuelan opposition figure. What's her name? Maria
Corina Machado, who's the de facto leader of the opposition. Exciting news for regime change fanatics.
Really, really exciting. Here he is announcing it.
Got to work on your bandwidth.
On a license, and it says, and I quote, "We are hereby reversing the consent."
Is the video playing all right or no?
Restart it.
Okay.
Well, we actually have my father's official statement on the revocation of the Chevron license, and it says, and I quote, "We are hereby reversing the concessions that crooked Joe Biden gave to Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela on the oil transaction agreement dated November 26, 2022. So this kills the Chevron license, correct? I mean, you think this is the opportunity that perhaps you need to get him to the table to make sure people understand that America actually means business, and that, let's say, those concessions are no longer going to allow them just to continue this nonsense.
This is a huge step, and this sends a clear, firm message that Maduro is in huge trouble.
All right, so Donald Trump Jr. is really excited that his dad is going to no longer allow Chevron to pump oil in Venezuela, which of course will hurt the Venezuelan economy even more. And I thought these guys were supposed to be America first. I thought they're supposed to be giving up regime change, when the whole point of blocking companies like Chevron is to pursue regime change. It was a part of Trump's effort that he launched in his first term, largely at the behest of John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, to overthrow Maduro. And I thought that they were putting an end to all that, to put America first and to lower energy prices. Because by cutting off Venezuela, what you're effectively doing on top of crushing Venezuela's economy and creating migrants, you're also raising energy prices for everyday Americans.
Yeah, the Trump administration had Richard Grenell in Caracas to negotiate, first of all, the release of several Americans who had been imprisoned there, accused of crimes, financial crimes, and spying, and also to negotiate the return of Venezuelan migrants, which the Venezuelan government of Nicolas Maduro is happy to accept. And many of those migrants are happy to return home, provided that there's some economy to return to. It's not like they're, coming to the U.S. to because they hate Venezuela and they want to get our wonderful healthcare benefits, our free healthcare benefits, and go to like Keith Urban concerts in Branson, Missouri. They're just here because they're economic refugees, and because there was TPS, which was a disastrous policy of the Biden administration, supported by Marco Rubio, the new Secretary of State. He helped shepherd it through. And part of it was about in growing the Gusano industrial complex of the Miami Cuban and Venezuelan, Nicaraguan kind of anti-communist regime change lobby by bringing more of them in. It was also about Donald Trump being able to generate more fear and xenophobia during his election campaign. The Republican Congress refused to pass the bill that the Democrats put forward, a very draconian border bill, because they wanted the crisis to fester under Joe Biden. And as the crisis built, both parties colluded to destroy Venezuela's economy, but Biden allowed the waiver on Chevron, so Chevron could continue to operate, partly because gas prices were so high in the U.S. Venezuela provides heavy crude, and it gets mixed in Texas. And they were sanctioning Russian oil at the time. So you have the opportunity now for the Trump administration, and I thought this was going to be the deal after Richard Grenell visited Caracas, the opportunity for Venezuela to absorb many of the migrants who, I've seen them, I'm sure you've seen them, Aaron, were languishing in horrid conditions in New York and many of them were just like lining up around the block to stay in hotels. The New York taxpayers were paying for it. Hotels were
Chicago
completely
too.
Chicago, just a bad situation all around. They
Yeah.
could go back and have an economy,
Yeah.
and the US would also get cheaper oil.
Yeah.
But the Gusano industrial complex has to imposed its will on Trump with its figurehead, Maria Corina Machado, whose entire career was sponsored by what? USAID. She is a creation of USAID, imposed on Donald Trump this demented, contradictory policy of giving up TPS and at the same time just continuing to destroy Venezuela's economy, which, as the economist Francisco Rodriguez has pointed out, will fuel, and as you pointed out, Aaron, will fuel more mass migration to the north to the US-Mexico border through the Darien Gap from Venezuela.
Well, here he is. The evidence is clear. U.S. sanctions deepened Venezuela's economic contraction and drove millions to leave. Revoking oil licenses will worsen the crisis and force more to flee. More sanctions won't bring political change. They will only bring more suffering to Venezuelan families. And this is an opposition economist, someone who Anya Parmpil interviewed extensively for her book, Corporate Coup, someone who's not a big fan of Maduro, but who nonetheless has the honesty to recognize that the sanctions imposed in the name of, undermining Maduro will actually just destroy Venezuela's economy. And someone else who pointed this out is the architect of Trump's regime change policy in Venezuela, along with Mike Pompeo, John Bolton, who said this to the Washington Post last year. There was no doubt the sanctions, along with the general economic deterioration before we imposed them. All right, so he's downplayed. But anyway, there's no doubt the sanctions was driving a lot of people out of the country. That, to me, was a way to put pressure on the country. So John Bolton admitted, and he tries to say that this was happening anyway, but if you look at the charts that Francisco Rodriguez put together, you see the major contraction of Venezuela's economy comes right when the worst Trump sanctions on Venezuela hit. So he's acknowledging, John Bolton is, that his way of putting pressure on the country, which is murderous sanctions, drove migration. And of course, and then Trump goes, and as you talked about, then demonizes this very same migrants that he helps cause through his policies. And it's just another example where commitment to hegemony, commitment to overthrowing anyone who's outside of U.S. control supersedes everything else, including Trump's professed concern with stopping migration and lowering energy prices. His policies undermined both of those areas in terms of stopping migration and lowering energy prices. Trump's coup in Venezuela, his coup attempt, undermined him there.
I think that, well, with Rubio's been kind of given this as this is Rubio's mission as Secretary of State, and he's been allowed to carry it out by Trump, provided he supports the policy on Ukraine and everything else, and acknowledges that we're in a multipolar world, as he did, which was really surprising. And Trump, I think his inner circle has been convinced that Venezuela can actually be brought to its knees economically, and that regime change is within reach there. There's also something I've pointed out before. Remember when Elon Musk was going bonkers for Venezuela, suddenly just was obsessed with it when Maria Corina Machado was protesting the election results. And what does Elon Musk need to fuel his business empire, other than massive amounts of corporate welfare from the Pentagon and other government bodies? He needs electric batteries, and to produce electric batteries, you need minerals. And Venezuela, unlike Western Ukraine, has lots and lots of it, lots of lithium. And so we will coup whoever we want, as Elon Musk said about Bolivia. It looks to me like Maria Corina Machado promised Elon Musk and a business consortium close to Donald Trump easy access to Venezuela's mineral wealth if they financed her campaign and brought her back to power. So I think that could be an issue here. And it's absolutely clear, because they're saying this on the record, The person they put in charge in the NSC of Cuba policy, Mauricio Claron, who's operating, I think he might be in the State Department. He's in charge of Cuba. He's a Miami Cuban regime changer, has said that he believes that there will be regime change in Cuba in the near future. It's just a question of how. And the Trump administration has just reimposed sanctions on Cuba in the form of making it a state sponsor of terrorism again. The Biden administration removed that designation in the final hours of Biden's presidency. And that
The final hours.
Yeah. I mean, it was a completely cowardly move, and they knew Trump would reimpose it. But when you do that to a country, especially a country that's 90 miles from the United States, it's impossible for it to have an economy. And conditions are dire inside Cuba right now.
And all this comes, Trump, intensifying the sanctions on Venezuela, intensifying sanctions on Cuba. All this comes just as Rick Grenell, who you mentioned earlier, he's the Trump envoy who helped secure the release of American citizens in Venezuela and traveled there for that. This comes a few days after at CPAC, the CPAC conference this past weekend. He said the U.S. is no longer in the business of regime change.
But I want to say one thing that's really important in this conversation. Donald Trump has done something different than Republican foreign policy leaders have done for 25 years.
This is a paradigm shift, what he's doing.
We articulate very clearly under Donald Trump, we don't do regime change. We are going to deal with the countries that are in front of us. And our criteria is not how do we make that country better? How do we make America better, stronger, and more prosperous for the people that live here?
So if you don't do regime change, why are you still pursuing regime change policies like imposing murderous sanctions on Venezuela, which were undertaken, as John Bolton talked about, in the name of regime change? That was the whole point, was to change the government. So if you're really not in the business of regime change anymore, as Rick Grenell claims, then they have to rethink these policies.
If to the extent there's any thinking at all. I mean, Grenell is more of a Trump guy than Rubio. He's probably going to be the next Secretary of State if Rubio doesn't last. And his main focus is China. He's an anti-China hardliner. And as long as the U.S. is sanctioning countries in Latin America, China will be offsetting the impact of U.S. sanctions by providing economic incentives and infrastructure to these countries. I saw it in Nicaragua. I hadn't been down there for like a year, and just being around anywhere, any city in Nicaragua, but especially in Managua, the Chinese presence was more visible than ever. They're providing affordable goods, and even Chinese restaurants are just everywhere, but affordable goods and imports due to the impact of the NICA Act passed by Congress unanimously. Like no one voted against it, to sanction Nicaragua because it has a socialist oriented government that resisted a US-backed coup. China's also working to provide infrastructure. They're putting forward plans for a new airport, even possibly building a canal, which the US would fervently oppose. But this is because the US won't play ball with these countries. So the only way that they can survive is to pivot to China. So, I mean, the U.S. has to make a choice. Does it continue to accelerate the dawn of a multipolar world through its regime change and sanctions policy, or does it do diplomacy? And right now it's choosing the former, as we should have expected under a Rubio State Department.
Yeah. It wasn't hard to predict.